My name is Reyna Maddox. I'm 36 years old. I'm a federal judge. And until that morning, my family thought I was a legal assistant somewhere in Idaho. They never asked. They never cared enough to ask. That day, I sat quietly in the back row of a high-ceiling courtroom in Raleigh, North Carolina. It smelled like varnished wood, paper, and burnt coffee. Every footstep echoed like it belonged to someone important. More important than me. The prosecution team was busy prepping their exhibits. The defense sat tight, whispering strategy. And my parents? Front row, straight-backed, confident, whispering about how their golden girl Sierra was going to walk out untouchable. They said it was all just a misunderstanding, a technical glitch, something a good lawyer could spin into dust. They didn't see me. Not when I came through security. Not when I followed a group of junior reporters into the gallery. I wore a plain charcoal suit. No makeup. Hair tucked back. I was good at blending in. Years of practice. The trial began like any other. Calm, methodical. But within the first hour, it started unraveling. Not for Sierra, for the court itself. Jurisdictional issues, federal flags, cross-state financial fraud. Things the local judge had no authority to handle. A quiet sidebar, a recess. Then came the moment. Judge Holloway, an older man with a calm voice and heavy shoulders, stood. This court is no longer able to proceed under its current jurisdiction, he said, scanning the room. Then he looked right at me. Judge Maddox, he said, would you please take the bench? I stood, and suddenly, every head in the room turned. My mother gasped. My father blinked like he'd seen a ghost. Sierra's jaw dropped, soundless. Yes, Your Honor, I said, calm as a still lake. And just like that, the daughter they'd ignored, dismissed, erased, walked to the front of the courtroom, past the headlines, past their expectations, past everything they thought they knew. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. And before I take you deeper into what happened that day, you need to understand where it started. Because I was 12 the first time I realized I was invisible. It was the spring of Sierra's senior year. She'd just won the Governor's Scholar Award. Some rare, prestigious academic honor. My parents threw a backyard party like she'd landed on the moon. Balloons, fairy lights, catering. They even rented a white tent in case it rained. That same week, I won a regional middle school debate competition. I printed the certificate myself, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and taped it to the fridge, right above the grocery list. The next morning, it was gone, replaced with an invitation to Sierra's celebration brunch. I asked my mom about it. She didn't even glance up from her phone. Oh, honey, she said, that's nice. But Sierra's award is a state-level honor. Let's not confuse things. That was how it always went. Sierra lit up the room, and I was expected to dim myself accordingly. She was charming, polished, predictable. I was quiet, observant, strange. She looked like the kind of girl who belonged on magazine covers. I looked like a walking question mark. I loved reading about constitutional law before bed. I made flowcharts to relax. Once, during dinner in 8th grade, I tried explaining judicial precedent. My dad laughed and asked if I was going to start billing us for unsolicited lectures. Sierra snorted into her wine. God, Reyna, can you hear yourself? They never noticed, but I stopped talking much after that. In high school, Sierra launched an app that tracked food waste in public schools. She ended up on local news, then national news, TEDx, scholarships, headlines. I captained our mock trial team. We went undefeated. Nobody at home said a word. My safe place was room 210, Mr. Parker's government class. He taught the Constitution like it was sacred scripture and logic like a survival skill. One afternoon, after class, he looked at me and said, "You think like a litigator, Reyna. Not because you're loud, because you pay attention to what no one else sees." He gave me an old paperback copy of Gideon's Trumpet. I read it in 2 nights, and I never stopped dreaming. College became my exit route. I got a full ride to the University of North Carolina. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I didn't tell them I was applying to Yale Law. When the acceptance letter came, I folded it into my journal and walked into the rain. I wanted to scream. I wanted to celebrate. But there was no one to tell. Except Lena, my college roommate. She was the first person who ever said the words out loud. "You're brilliant," she told me, staring at the case summaries I had written on our dorm whiteboard. "It's terrifying, and honestly, kind of beautiful." We became inseparable. I told her everything. About Sierra, about the parties, about how silence can feel louder than cruelty. She listened. And that, just being heard, changed everything. Law school was hell, but I thrived in the silence. Clerkships followed. A federal internship in D.C., a confidential appointment as a circuit-level judge on an interstate financial fraud task force. I was 34. There were no press releases, no public records, no photos. That's the kind of court I worked in. One with serious jurisdiction and zero noise. My name never trended. But inside courtrooms, I carried weight. Back in Idaho, my family still thought I was a researcher for some law firm. My mother once told her church friend that I helped attorneys organize their notes. I let her. Because what difference did it make? They never cared. The only applause I ever truly wanted came from courtrooms, places where words had weight, where precision meant power. And yet, deep down, a part of me still wished they'd ask. Just once. Just enough to prove I hadn't disappeared. It was 2 years ago when the call came in. I was in chambers, reviewing a sealed case file, when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in over a year. Reyna Maddox. I stared at the screen. 10 seconds, maybe 15. Then I answered. "Reyna," she said, her voice upbeat like we'd just talked last week. "Hey, I need a favor." Of course she did. She'd launched some fintech startup, ethical investment algorithms, or so the headlines said. It was picking up steam, millions raised, glowing write-ups in Forbes, some spot on a 30 under 30 list. My parents framed the article and sent it around the church newsletter. I found out about it when Lena texted me a screenshot. "She's still calling herself a genius, huh?" she wrote. Now Sierra needed help reviewing a batch of contracts. "Just a quick look," she said breezily. "You've always been good at that legal stuff." Legal stuff. I didn't correct her. Didn't mention I was a sitting federal judge. Didn't tell her my decisions carried the weight of entire statutes. I just said, "Sure, send them over." Part of me was curious. The other part? Still, stupidly, wanted her to see me. She sent a folder with over a dozen documents. Subscription agreements, safe notes, equity clauses, full of red flags, glaring loopholes, stuff that could tank her entire funding round if the wrong eyes noticed. I spent 3 weekends combing through every page. I cross-referenced federal compliance codes, flagged inconsistencies, annotated every risky clause, wrote a 15-page memo with detailed breakdowns and suggested revisions. I hit send. Waited. Nothing. No reply, no text, no thank you. A week later, I saw a video clip from her pitch presentation. Standing in front of investors, Sierra smiled like she owned the planet. "We caught a few structural issues in the contracts," she said. "My instincts just kicked in, I guess." Applause. Camera flashes. She shined, and I felt cold. Not angry, not hurt, just empty. Like I'd reached the point where disappointment didn't even sting anymore. I didn't want a standing ovation, but a text? A call? Something? Instead, she posted a LinkedIn update the next day. "Always trust your gut, especially when the stakes are high." My parents commented with fire emojis. My dad emailed me the link. Subject line, "Look what your sister did." No message, no "How are you?" Just a hyperlink to her spotlight. I didn't reply. Didn't mention the memo. Didn't mention that I'd just been quietly appointed to a federal fraud oversight panel, or that my ruling had been cited in 3 legal journals that year. None of that would have registered. Not to people who measured worth by photo ops and dinner party punchlines. But the real shock came 6 months later. Through the judicial grapevine, I started hearing whispers. Sierra's startup was under investigation. The SEC had flagged discrepancies, inflated earnings, misleading investor materials. Private audits were quietly underway. Her ethical empire, it turned out, was a house of cards. At first, I stayed silent, focused on my docket, told myself I was too close. Then a sealed file landed on my desk. Preliminary jurisdictional review. Across the top, Reyna Maddox. My stomach flipped. I recused myself immediately, filed the paperwork, declared the conflict of interest, sent a private message to the chief judge explaining everything. I expected to be benched. Instead, I was placed on standby. As a consulting federal judge, should the case require escalation across jurisdictions. It was standard protocol. But for me, it felt like holding a loaded gun with no safety. Weeks passed. The case moved through state channels. My name stayed off the record. Until it didn't. A jurisdictional gap emerged. Federal statutes triggered. The presiding judge, Holloway, stalled. And then my phone rang. "You might be stepping in," the clerk said softly. I hung up and sat there, completely still. I'd known this moment might come. I just hadn't expected it so soon. Or so loud. That morning, I walked into the courthouse in Raleigh like I belonged there, because I did. The building was cold, all glass and stone, built for silence. The kind of place where people whisper out of habit. No robe, no fanfare, just me in a charcoal suit and a badge that opened every door without question. I entered through a back hallway. Consulting judges don't walk through the front. We don't wave. We don't announce ourselves. We sit in the shadows until needed. And that morning, I was needed. The courtroom was already full when I slipped in. Sierra sat at the defense table, flanked by two high-profile attorneys. Her hair was perfect, posture solid, but her fingers twitched. Her jaw was locked tight. She knew the walls were closing in. My parents sat directly behind her. My mother held a string of pearls that didn't match her blouse. My father looked proud, as if this whole ordeal was beneath them, as if it would all vanish with the right verdict. A reporter leaned in and asked my mother about the charges. She smiled. "Sierra's our pride. Our younger daughter? Well, she's more private, not really built for this kind of spotlight." I didn't flinch. The prosecution outlined their case like a scalpel. Clean, precise, brutal. Falsified earnings, altered documents, recordings of Sierra promising ridiculous returns. One of the jurors visibly winced. Then came the shift. The lead prosecutor introduced new evidence: emails, wire transfers, bank records crossing multiple states, federal violations. Judge Holloway called for a recess. I followed him into the hallway and heard him on the phone with the chief judge. "This is out of my hands," he said. "We're into federal territory. I need authorization to request standby." 5 minutes later, the clerk turned to me. "You're up." When the court reconvened, you could feel it. The tension, the silence, the shift in air pressure. Judge Holloway stood. "Due to federal implications, this case now falls under dual jurisdiction. We are invoking the presence of the consulting judge pre-cleared for this circuit." He turned to the back of the courtroom. "Judge Maddox, would you please take the bench?" Gasps. I stood. My heels clicked against the tile like a metronome. My mother turned around, mouth open. My father froze. Sierra went pale. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and the court stood. For me. "All rise." The bailiff's voice rang out crisp and final. And they did. Every person in that courtroom stood. For me. I walked the center aisle like it was the only path I'd ever known. The tile beneath my heels clicked steady, unshaken. The air felt tight, like the whole room was holding its breath. My mother's hand shot up to her chest, her mouth parting like she might speak but couldn't find the words. My father's eyes didn't blink. He just stared, like his brain hadn't caught up yet. And Sierra? She looked like she'd seen a ghost. No rage, no tears, just disbelief. The kind of look people give when the sky cracks open in the middle of a sunny day. I approached the bench without breaking stride. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, calm, measured. I took my seat behind the elevated desk. Suddenly, I wasn't the shadow anymore. I was the storm. The file in front of me was one I already knew, intimately. I'd studied it before I was ever meant to touch it. I knew every exhibit, every statute, every name buried in the fine print. This court now proceeds under federal jurisdiction, I declared. Let the record reflect the transition. All previous motions will be reviewed. And just like that, the tone shifted. The prosecution regained steam. Their arguments sharpened. The defense? Caught off guard. They weren't ready for federal oversight. Their whole strategy had been built on local technicalities. Now they were playing on my turf. Every time they objected, I answered with clarity. Every time they flailed, I anchored. I wasn't loud. I didn't need to be. Federal law doesn't shout. It simply stands. Sierra didn't look at me, at first. But during the second recess, she found me in the hallway. She wasn't composed anymore. Her voice cracked, eyes wide, mask slipping. "Reyna," she snapped, "how could you do this to me?" I met her eyes, unflinching. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "You built this lie. I'm just here while it falls apart." She stepped closer. "You're supposed to be my sister." I tilted my head. "No," I said. "You are supposed to be mine." Behind her, I saw our mother approaching. She looked smaller now. Her voice came out thin and high-pitched. "Reyna, please. You don't understand what this will do to our family." I didn't hesitate. "You weren't worried about the family when you erased me." She blinked, stunned. I walked away. My father was nearby, silent, watching me. Not like I was a stranger, but like he was seeing me for the first time in his life. Back in court, things moved quickly. 3 days. That's all it took. The jury listened. The evidence mounted. And when it came time to deliberate, they didn't need long. 6 hours. The room was still when the foreperson stood. "On the count of securities fraud," she began, "we find the defendant guilty." Sierra didn't flinch, not on the surface. But I saw it. The subtle bob of her throat as she swallowed hard. The loss. "On the count of wire fraud, guilty." My mother made a noise like she'd just dropped a glass and was waiting to hear the pieces hit the ground. "On the count of conspiracy to defraud investors, guilty." My father sat like he was carved from stone. No expression, no reaction. Just a man who suddenly didn't recognize the room he was in. Sierra turned her head slightly. Her eyes met mine, not with fury, not even shame, just confusion. As if she still believed the rules didn't apply to her, that the walls were props, and the judge's voice, my voice, was part of some script she could rewrite with a smile. But the law doesn't care about who you are to your family. It only cares about what you did. I read the sentencing as required by statute. Minimum term, no bail pending appeal, immediate transfer to federal custody. My voice didn't crack. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindictive. I was precise. When I struck the gavel, the cameras erupted. Reporters shouted. Flashbulbs lit up the courtroom like a lightning storm. But I didn't look at them. I left the bench, returned to chambers, shut the door. Silence. Real silence. Not the kind I used to sit in at family dinners. The kind you earn. The kind that means you said what needed to be said, and no one can touch it. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Voicemail. My mother. Her voice was cracked and trembling. "Reyna, we didn't know. We didn't realize. We're sorry." I deleted it before she finished. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. They had 3 decades to ask me who I was, what I was building, who I was becoming. They never cared to know, until I was sitting above them. That night, I didn't go home. I didn't turn on the news, didn't scroll the headlines. I didn't need to. I already knew what I said. Judge revealed as sister of disgraced tech CEO. Maddox family scandal raises ethics concerns. The invisible daughter becomes the face of federal justice. But I didn't read a single word of it. I didn't need their takes. I had lived it. Instead, I met Lena at a small jazz bar tucked between 2 forgotten storefronts on South Street. It was our place. No one there knew my name. No cameras. No whispering. She was already at the table when I arrived. When I walked in, she lifted her glass. "To Judge Maddox." she said, her eyes sharp with pride. You shattered the whole illusion. I didn't smile. Not yet. It wasn't about shattering, I told her. It was about stepping out of the shadow they left me in. She leaned back, exhaled. So, what now? I looked around the bar. The low light. The quiet conversations. The untouched space. I built something better, I said. And that was the beginning of the real shift. I started mentoring, quietly at first. No press, no website, no speeches. It started with one law student, Nia, 23, brilliant, terrified of her own voice. She reminded me of myself. I helped her prep her first oral argument. She stumbled, she cried. Then she came back and nailed the second one. By her third round, she walked into chambers like she belonged there. Word got out. Not loud, not viral, but real. Soon there were 7 young women in my office every other Friday, some still in school. Others already passed over for promotions or told they were too intense or quiet. Some were told to smile more. One had been told she wasn't the right kind of confident. I didn't teach them how to be louder. I taught them how to be precise, how to be unshakable, how to build arguments like architecture and take up space like law books. Dense, unavoidable, permanent. We didn't talk about Sierra. We didn't need to. She was serving her sentence in a federal facility in West Virginia. Minimum security. Quarterly reports arrived like weather forecasts. Impersonal, distant. I didn't feel anger anymore. Just distance. Like watching a ship disappear into the fog. You don't hate the ship. You just stop waiting for it to come back. My parents reached out 3 more times. A letter, a holiday card, another voicemail. I never responded. Some fractures don't need fixing. They need to stay broken to protect what's finally whole. On the 1-year anniversary of the verdict, I walked through the courthouse alone. Friday evening, after hours, elevators empty, halls echoing. I stopped outside courtroom 3B, the place where everything changed. I didn't go in. I just stood there. And then I heard it. Judge Maddox? I turned. A girl, maybe 16, stood there in a school blazer, holding a notepad. Her teacher hovered nearby. She looked nervous, but hopeful. I saw your name on the wall, she said, pointing to the plaque outside the courtroom. You're the one who... I nodded. Yes, I am. She bit her lip. I want to be a judge one day, she said, but people keep saying I'm too quiet. I smiled. Then let them talk, I said. And you keep building. Her eyes lit up. And as she walked away, I stayed there a moment longer. There are no statues for women like me. No parades. Just the quiet satisfaction of refusing to disappear. Of turning silence into law. Of turning shadows into foundations. They used to call me invisible. Now, when I speak, rooms rise. I never answered the holiday card. Not the voicemail after that either. I read my father's letter. 3 pages. Handwritten. But I folded it back into the envelope without replying. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about protecting myself from reopening wounds that had finally started to scar over. They wanted reconciliation now that I was headline-worthy. But they hadn't earned the version of me they were suddenly so eager to meet. They had years to notice, decades to care, and every chance to ask. Now that I was no longer invisible, they mistook visibility for permission. It wasn't. Meanwhile, Sierra had settled into her sentence. 6 years. No parole until the halfway point. She was serving time in a low-security federal facility, the kind where the walls don't look like walls, but they hold you just the same. The quarterly reports arrived like clockwork. Status, compliant. Behavior, cooperative. Vocational track, finance and accounting education. The irony was suffocating. I didn't respond to those either. There was no point. She never wrote me. Not even once. She was rebuilding in her own way. And I wasn't part of the blueprint. That's fine. I was rebuilding too, only differently. Each Friday, my office became a kind of sanctuary. 7 women, all different stages of life and law, showed up hungry to learn. Not just legal process, but how to hold the room without begging for approval. We never once called it a mentorship. It was more like an alliance. One week, Nia stood up during a simulation and tore through a case summary with the confidence of someone who had finally found her own center. No stuttering, no shrinking. Just pure focus. I nodded when she finished. The others clapped quietly, not out of politeness, but recognition. Later, as I gathered my things, I glanced at my reflection in the darkened window. No robe, no courtroom, just me. And for once, I didn't feel like I needed to prove anything to anyone. Not to Sierra, not to my parents, not to the version of myself who used to stare at empty chairs, wishing someone, anyone, would clap. The applause that used to haunt me, I didn't need it anymore, because I had found something quieter, stronger. Validation that didn't ask for permission. One morning in early spring, a young associate judge asked me to speak at a women-in-law panel downtown. It was a small event, maybe 40 people. Half were interns. I almost said no. But then I thought of that 16-year-old girl in the courthouse hallway, the one who said she was too quiet to be a judge. So I said yes. The room was bare, folded chairs, lukewarm coffee, stale croissants, the kind of event no one's live streaming. I didn't prepare remarks. I didn't bring notes. I just told them the truth. That being underestimated can be fuel if you use it right. That silence is not the same as absence, and that when no one sees you, you have two choices: shrink or build anyway. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They just looked at me. Some had tears in their eyes. One of them, an older woman, maybe late 40s, stood up and said, "I thought I was the only one." You never are. Not really. You just forget how many of us learned to thrive in rooms that never wanted us there. Later that week, I received a certified letter. Not from my parents. From Mr. Parker, my old government teacher. The one who first saw something in me when I was still taping debate certificates to a refrigerator no one looked at. The envelope was faded, the penmanship sharp. Inside was a single page. Reyna, I watched the trial. The moment I heard you rule on that first objection, I knew it was you. You always had it, that quiet power. I still keep the whiteboard you used in my garage. I tell every student I teach now, sometimes the best minds don't walk loud, but they walk far. I'm proud of you, Parker. I read it twice before I cried. Not because it hurt, because it healed. Not recognition. Release. It reminded me that sometimes the most important people in your life are the ones who saw you before the headlines, before the robe, before the gavel, and who believed you were already enough. That letter now sits in a frame in my office, right beside a copy of Gideon's Trumpet. And when new mentees come into my chambers for the first time, they always pause and read it. Every single one. A year passed. The headlines faded. The Maddox scandal was buried beneath newer dramas, flashier CEOs, louder meltdowns, bigger crashes. The way these things always go. But for me, everything had changed. Quietly, irrevocably. I wasn't chasing justice anymore. I was becoming it. Most Fridays, the courthouse slowed to a crawl by 5 p.m., but not my chambers. At 5:10 sharp, 7 women would file in: Nia, Lexi, Farah, Jordan, Ruth, Cam, and Haley. All of them had been overlooked, talked over, told they were smart, but now they were something else entirely. They weren't louder. They were clearer. They weren't tougher. They were sharper. They weren't angrier. They were focused. They didn't want a shortcut, just a fair fight. And they were building their own tables now, no permission required. One evening, as we wrapped a mock hearing, I caught a moment that froze me in place. Nia correcting a misquoted statute, firm but composed. Lexi countering with precedent. Haley giving closing remarks with perfect cadence. I didn't speak. I just watched. They didn't need me anymore. And that was the point. I still ruled cases, still wore the robe, still walked the marble halls with my badge and my quiet step. But something had shifted. I wasn't just a judge in name. I was becoming someone younger women whispered about in law school study rooms. Not a headline, a blueprint. Sierra remained in West Virginia. Her updates arrived every 3 months. Status reports, Sentence reviews. One report noted she'd begun teaching financial literacy to fellow inmates. Good. I hoped she meant it. I hoped she was finding purpose, because I had no intention of going back to fix anything. We had both been broken by the same house, but I was the only one who learned how to build something better with the pieces. My parents stopped trying around month 15. No more letters, no more emails. Just a Christmas card from a generic template service with no handwritten signature. That was the final nail. And honestly, it felt like relief. I'd spent so many years trying to become someone worth clapping for. Now I was just becoming. Not for them, for me. On the anniversary of Sierra's sentencing, I walked the courthouse alone. No one asked me to. It was a Friday, just past 6. Elevators had stopped pinging. The halls echoed soft and empty. I passed courtroom 3B again. I didn't stop. I walked right past it and turned down a smaller corridor that most visitors never saw. Courtroom 1C. Small, unremarkable. The first bench I ever sat on. The first time I wore the robe. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. No lights. No reporters. No one. Just me and the silence. I sat in the chair where I'd once fumbled through my first ruling, where I'd once doubted every breath. Now, I just closed my eyes, and I breathed like I had nothing left to prove. A few minutes passed. Then a knock on the door. Judge Maddox? I opened my eyes. A court clerk poked her head in. Sorry, there's a group of students in the lobby. Mock trial tour. They were hoping to meet you. I can send them away. I stood, straightened my sleeves. No, I said. Bring them in. 5 minutes later, I was standing at the front of the courtroom. 7 teens filed in. Diverse, bright-eyed, already scribbling in notebooks. One girl raised her hand before I even introduced myself. What's the hardest part of your job? She asked. I smiled. Knowing when to speak, and when to let silence do the work for you. They all went quiet, wrote it down like gospel. After the Q&A, as they filed out, a younger boy, maybe 15, stayed behind. He hesitated, then held out his hand. I want to be a judge one day, he said. Everyone keeps saying I'm not tough enough. I shook his hand firmly. Toughness is overrated, I said. Precision isn't. He nodded like it was the first time someone gave him permission to exist exactly as he was. After they left, I lingered for a while. I looked around the room, not at the bench or the seal on the wall, but at the seats. Because here's what they don't tell you. The most powerful people in the courtroom aren't always behind the bench. Sometimes they're sitting in silence, waiting to rise.